Welcome to this episode of Social Friendly Insights. Taking forward our Future of Everything discourse, today we're going to be talking about the future of education and learning. And we have with us Joanne Dominico. Joanne is a learning strategist at the Centennial College, Toronto, Canada. She has over 15 years of experience working in diverse educational settings, and she also has her own brand, Study with Joanne, that helps students study more effectively and efficiently. So, hi, Joanne. Thank you for taking time out and joining us on this show. And I hope you and your family are safe during this pandemic and this crisis.
Yes, hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's early in the morning here in Toronto, Canada.
Okay, we are doing this discussion series, to understand what this pandemic is doing to industries and businesses across the globe. So this first one, we are starting with the future of education because we've seen this pandemic create a lot of chaos and confusion and all sorts of uncertainties all over the world, and everyone is trying to reimagine and realign ways of doing things and trying to work out new ways of getting things done. And so it doesn't, it's the same with education because schools and colleges are shut indefinitely. And everyone is trying to figure out how to, keep the learning going, especially as it's the new academic year that's starting. So to start off by asking you, what are the challenges that you've seen come up in this course of time after this pandemic?
I've seen many challenges in terms of education. Initially, for our students here, there was an extended March break. So there was 3 weeks where the students had no input from the schools or the school boards or from their teachers. So it was very much left up to the parents. And of course, every household has differing situations. Some parents are working outside of the home, but now daycares are closed and schools are closed, so they have their children. And some parents are working from home and not able to dedicate the time to continue with the child's learning while they're home. So that was one challenge. And then when they did introduce the distance learning plans, I noticed that there's a lack of consistency across school boards and even within individual schools. So some students are receiving live face-to-face contact with teachers on a daily basis, whereas other students are just getting video recordings sent to them. Another huge challenge that I think is a global issue is that internet and technology access is not the same for everyone. So some families who don't have the technology or don't have the internet connection are not able to access the content in the same way that other families are. So that's been a major challenge as well.
Yeah, interesting that you point that out because I've also have been talking to teachers and students and parents alike, and this problem has come up in a big way in South Asia because internet penetration, it's very less. I mean, just over 50% in India, but the other countries there's just no data available to know what's the real number. So I mean, and most households don't even have more than one device, so a mobile phone or a laptop. So that's a major challenge here. And also, like you say, that the dispersion of education is not equal across the board because some, like you said, schools are asking the teachers to send across the videos, and some of them are just, have one-to-one interaction. So I think we'll address that later. But I think to start with, we should just talk about what do you think are the differences in a traditional classroom teaching and an online classroom?
Well, the main difference is obviously the face-to-face connection and the level of engagement that provides. And children especially really thrive on that one-to-one, the face-to-face rather connection with their teachers and the learning. And that social element, I'd say, is also one of the biggest things that's missing. The children allowing them to engage and interact and play with their peers. Play is such a crucial part of being a child, right? So I know personally, I'm a mother as well. I have a 7-year-old at home and he misses his friends. He really misses his friends. And he also is not getting the same level of physical activity because, at school they have recess and lunch break and gym class. And although we try to keep him active, it's not, if I calculate the time, it's very different. So with the online learning classroom, again, depending on how the school has decided to disperse the content, it's sort of up to the parent to determine when is the child going to access it, if they're able to, if they meet the technology needs. And what extra work is going to be supplemented. So the teachers, some of them may do a good job in what's called a differentiated instruction. So they're providing different levels of content so that depending on the child's strengths and weaknesses, they can access the content in a way that's helpful for them. So I see that as one of the pros. It might be a bit easier to do that online versus in the classroom when you're teaching a large class at the same time. But I see many challenges. And also what I've noticed here in Canada is they're not giving too much work. It's equaling 1 to 1.5 hours of schoolwork per day. So perhaps 5 to 6 hours of schoolwork per week for elementary school age children like my son. And so it's up to the parent if they want to supplement with other education. Because if you think about it, many of the teachers may also have their own children that are at home. So they don't have 6 hours a day to be teaching, their kids virtually. So many challenges, but I see, those are the major differences that I see.
Right. And like you said, the recess and games period and the gym classes, these are the things that kids look forward to, meeting with friends, playing with them. So that's, I think, a major downside to online learning that really can't be supplemented with anything else. So, in your opinion, what does a successful online classroom look like? What's the best case scenario?
I think, in my opinion, based on the current circumstances, the best online classroom would offer a lot of flexibility in terms of how the students can access the content. So providing many different mediums. So for example, a live option for parents who are able to help their child to log in and see the teacher's face and, explaining things live would be great. A video for parents who are not able to access it at the time could go back and watch it after. Readings that they could do, or other YouTube videos that they could link to, and other resources that they could recommend. So that way the child has the flexibility to get the content in the way that's best suited for them and for however their household can manage it at that time. So I think that flexibility is key. And I also think flexibility in terms of assessment. So I know, I'm not sure how it is there in India, but in Canada right now, it seems that they're not really doing any formalized assessment because it's challenging to do that online, but it's still offering a variety of ways for students to express the knowledge that they've learned. So they can, write something out, write a few paragraphs about what they learned, or they can speak about it and send the voice recording or do a video or create a project. So I think flexibility and creativity are two things that will really help to make it an effective online classroom.
Right, I totally agree. And we've talked about what the role of students and what the role of parents are going to be. But in our part of the world, technology is still considered to be a big, people are really scared of it. So, from the teacher's perspective, what do you think? What resources are available online so that teachers can just log on, train themselves, get better at doing stuff like this? Because I've been talking to a few of them and they're saying that just to deliver a 30-minute lecture, I've had to prepare for 4-5 hours. I've had to see how to record a video. I have had to do that. So that's just created so much of tension and so much of pressure that's been created on them because they've got to complete the curriculum and on time. And like you said, that assessment part is a problem because the board exams in India also have been postponed. But anyway, that aside, what do you think? What should teachers be doing, and what resources are available to them to train themselves to get better?
That's a great question. I think that the way that I'm seeing it done here is that the school boards are deciding what platforms the educators will be using so that there's consistency across the school board. So for example, in the Toronto District School Board, our largest school board here in Ontario, they are using Google Classroom. So they're using all of the Google G Suite features, Google Meet, Google Hangout, all those features that they're using to upload and create their content and deliver it to their students. The school board that my son belongs to uses an app called Edsby. So it's a little bit different than Google Classroom, but I think what's good is that consistency. And something else that the school boards did, which I think was helpful, is they sent out surveys to all the families and asked them, do you have any technology concerns? And then they work with the family to either loan them a device for the period of the pandemic, or to work with them to see if they could help them with gaining an internet connection. So I know I understand that's maybe not possible in all areas, but I thought it was a good start for them to at least try to establish a baseline of what parents and families had access to in order to adequately access the content, right? So I think that consistency is key. I believe YouTube has a wealth of resources in terms of how-to videos, in terms of teachers, teaching themselves. But I do kind of feel that it should be the responsibility of the school board and the school to ensure that the educators are adequately trained on how to utilize the platforms. And then, allowing them some creative reign within that, but encouraging them to have that consistency, which I think then makes it more equitable for all the students in that school board. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that's something that's realistic for India. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure because, 1.3 billion people, that sort of population, if you're looking at that, and then schools from, villages and to extreme remote places, I don't think that, some places don't still have electricity, up until now. So I think, yeah, that might prove to be a challenge, but I think the government is doing their bit. So I think those things are happening, but definitely more can be done because there's no unity into the, dispersion of education or the technology, like you said. So it's all over the place. There's no one tool that so teachers have been advised to use or schools are using, across the board. Like I was reading a funny story where there were about 40 students in the class, and then there's no admin feature in Google Hangouts. So what the students did was they just put put the teacher out of the conversation. So it was just all the 40 kids having fun, So I think this time is trying, and also people trying to cope with this in their own way. So that brings me to the next, sort of question that's come up. This online learning and schools getting closed indefinitely, and this pandemic and all of this has, created a lot of anxiety for all the teachers, the parents, the students, and everyone is really, really strung title. I think, what are your thoughts? What should each member be doing to, sort of not be this stressed, live better, and to, yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on that. My first thought is I'm really big on self-care for everybody, for parents, for teachers, for children. So doing things like getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, and getting regular physical exercise. I think these things, they help with mood stabilization. Like I've seen research that states that exercise can be just as effective as some medication for things like depression and anxiety because of the endorphins that are released. You feel good. And also, when you get enough sleep, you're more likely to remain calm and be in a good mood and just be more positive, as well as eating those healthy foods. So that's always my first recommendation. And I feel like because of this pandemic and everybody having to stay home, it's sort of allowing us to have a slower pace of life, which is making more room. I know me personally, I'm getting at least 2 hours more sleep than I was averaging before the pandemic, which is great. Something else is, I think, sort of limiting your consumption of the news if you find that that's causing anxiety, because every day, like hearing, the numbers rising and the death tolls rising, that can be very anxiety provoking, especially for children who may not fully understand what the pandemic means. So having open and honest conversations with your children, but also just not having that news on in the background 24 hours, I think is a good one. Allowing for effective ways of expressing how you feel. So this is very important for children, but it can be beneficial for adults too. So whether it's the discussions or even journaling or coloring or painting, just a way to express your emotions so it doesn't get all built up inside. And then lastly, I strongly recommend that people seek professional support if they feel that their anxiety and stress levels are unmanageable and affecting other parts of their daily life. So I know there's many different, either websites or hotlines or personal private counselors that people can reach out to. A lot of support that's available if people need it. So I encourage them, don't wait if you feel like, your child's not coping well or you yourself personally are struggling, because there's so many variables. Some people lost a job. Some people don't know how they're going to, pay for food, or maybe some people don't have access to food. Toilet paper has been a funny thing, but it's not so funny. But everybody hoarded the toilet paper, and now some families are having trouble. So it could be small everyday stressors, or it could be large, major life stressors that have been impacted as a result of this pandemic. So my main message to parents is really been, just try your best. Just take it day by day. If you have a bad day and your child doesn't do any work, or if they're spending a little bit more time on screens than you would like, it's okay. We're in a global pandemic. Just do your best to get through one day at a time. Yeah.
Right, right. No, of course, that makes sense. And this is a sort of pandemic that's never, I mean, this sort of crisis has never happened to us before. So, it's really scary. But I'd like to touch upon one thing that you mentioned early on, that you said that, students are missing out on their games and the fun and, their extracurriculars. So what should people be doing? Also, because I think 2020 looks like it's going to be a write-off, and even people, even children, students trying to go abroad for higher education, because of the lockdowns, they might not be able to, and if they even are able to, their parents may not be comfortable sending them. So, how should students be using this year, this time to to hone their extracurriculars and their hobbies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my advice to that is to really be creative. I think you really know your child and what types of things that this is a great time to explore their natural interests. So for example, my son is very interested in animals. He loves all animals and sea creatures, and that's always been a strong interest of his. So every day I allow him some creative time. And Google has this cool thing where you Google certain animals and you can click on view in 3D, and then you have augmented reality. There's a tiger in your living room and you can take a picture with it. He loves this. So how I've incorporated an educational aspect is he now has to research about tigers and tell me all about them, and we talk about it, and then he can take all the pictures of the tigers. And so I think being creative. I also think it's a great time to work on life skills with children of all ages. So my son, I've been teaching him how to make his own breakfast, which actually selfishly helps me out a little bit. But I think even for older students, learning how to cook or learning how to build something, if you have some wood or materials, learning how to paint, working on artistic endeavors. But really, if students have a natural interest to something, now is a great time to maybe learn a new language, right? How to solve a Rubik's Cube. I've never been able to do that, but we have this time. So yes, they may not be able to travel, but even having them research different countries that they'd like to travel, and creating a book with all the different countries and the places they'd like to visit in those countries. So thankfully, those who do have access to technology can still learn about so much, right? And if you don't, then, use what you have at home. So if you have books, if you have recipe books, try cooking. Even walking in nature, you can learn about the nature that's surrounding you. So I really think parents sometimes have to think outside of the box in terms of how we can use this time to enrich ourselves in our lives. Yeah. What have you been doing? I'm curious. What have you been learning about?
Me and my wife, we're both musicians. So we keep, in between work, we just keep humming new tunes. We just keep recording stuff. We photograph. We do all sorts of things. We just stay busy the entire day. Or, how much more TV can you watch? So, yeah, so I think, yeah, you're right. The creative aspect has to be brought out in this time. Coming out of this, every one of us should be a much better artist, a much better poet, or an author or something. We should come out with one really good skill is what I believe.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea as well. Yeah, come up with something. So for me, it's funny. I work full time at a college, so we can talk about older students, older adults. Younger adults and older students as well, mature students. But my personal practice study with Joanne, I've been so busy because I've had a lot of media requests, and I guess similar to your field, during this time, people really want to know more information about what I do and how I can support students and parents. So it's been busy, but I welcome it.
Yeah, so Joanne, I would love for you to talk about your brand, Study with Joanne, because you're a learning strategist, and you can be the best guide for teachers, for parents, for students. So all of our listeners, I'm sure you'd be more than happy if they reach out to you, for anything. But if you can just speak about your brand and tell them how it will be beneficial for them, I think it will help them.
For sure. So I started studying with Joanne. Like I mentioned before, I work full-time at a college in Toronto, Canada, and I work with post-secondary students, and I teach them anything from time management to reading their textbook and taking notes and just learning how to study and achieve better grades. So I'm like an academic counselor, let's say. So a few years ago, I had the pleasure of doing a TEDx talk. Are you familiar with TED Talks? Yes.
Yes,
I
of
did a
course, of course.
TEDx talk.
I've seen that TED talk. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was all about how exercise can help students to be more resilient. And as a result of that, I did have a lot of people reaching out to me, and I decided to create Study with Joanne so that I could help more students instead of just the ones who attended the institution I work at. So that's really how it was born. And so what I offer is free 20-minute consultations. I offer workshops. So I do group workshops where now they're on Zoom, not in person anymore, where I can talk about specific topics. And now a lot of them have been on online learning and how to maximize your abilities to succeed and, do well with open book tests, etc., how to set up your study space and be productive. And I also do speaking. I like to talk, as you see. So I do motivational speaking and keynote speaking about anything to do with learning, studying, and achieving academic success. So those are sort of the areas that I work on right now. And, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. It's always at Study with Joanne. I'm always posting tips for parents and for students on how they can help get good grades.
Wonderful, wonderful. Just one more thing I'd like to discuss with you, Joanne. It's about in our part of the world, in this geography. I mean, private tuitions are huge. Even if students go to the best of schools, I mean, they'll come back home, they'll drop off their bags, they'll have lunch, and then they'll head off to their tuition teacher. I mean, be it math, be it physics, be it chemistry. They have at least 3 to 4 tuitions, everyone. So in times like these, what should private tuition teachers be doing? Because the geographic advantage that they had, because students usually chose the teachers that were closest to their houses. So now, because no one can move out because of the lockdown, so what can these private tuition teachers do? Because I feel just sticking to their curriculum and their notes is not going to be enough, because they're going to be competing against the best of teachers on an online common platform. So what more should such teachers be doing so that they can get students to be interested in what they're offering?
That's a great question. And here we call it tutoring, or I guess like academic coaching. So we have similar things here. I don't think it's as widespread as it is in India. Like after you emailed me, I did a little bit of research, and I was amazed at it's a lot, and it's quite expensive.
Yeah, it's huge. And there are institutes that are huge. And then like a college student who's tutoring a school student, it even comes down to that level. So, it's across all spectrum.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is obviously they're going to have to change their delivery model, due to the pandemic. So if they're able to, virtually meet with their students, that's fine. If not, though, they're going to have to work on content creation, I guess, that can be delivered to the student. And then they're going to have to, because I guess what the tutors serve as is accountability, right? So, when students are told to do something and work on their own, do they have the same motivation to get it done? But when you're going to meet privately with someone, then you're forced to get it done. So I think they have to be creative in terms of, how do I continue with that accountability piece, and how do I continue to provide the same resources? Something that I notice with many students, because obviously at my institution we have many international students that come from India, and I noticed that the way that they're taught is different in terms of, it's a lot of they know the foundational skills and the fundamentals very well. They rely on that rote memorization, and they know so much. But sometimes when you get to post-secondary, especially here, I'm trying to think of the right word. The emphasis is not so much on memorization and recall of what you've learned. It's more on the application, right? How can I show that I understand this information and apply it? And really what I find, even here with high school students, secondary students, they come and they expect the teacher to teach them everything. So they think 80% of what they learn is the responsibility of a teacher to teach them, and only 20% of what they learn is on their own through their homework and projects, etc. But in my opinion, when you get to post-secondary, it should be the other way around. 80% of what you learn should be your responsibility, and only 20% should be through the direction and guidance of an instructor or tutor. So I think that it would be beneficial if students are taught a little more independence in terms of how they can learn. And so I think part of that may be creating the resources that allow students to learn not just the knowledge, but also understanding why. So I don't want to get too far into some of my strategies, but I often talk about stages of learning, like receiving the information, processing the information, storing it, and then being able to retrieve it, right? So many students, when they're learning, they just get stuck on receiving. How can I receive all this information into my brain? But they're really not processing and understanding. And then they're not learning how to adequately store it in their brain. So I think my advice would be, first, figure out your new service delivery model, since it cannot be in person. Second, creation of resources that can allow students to learn independently. And third, figure out a system to allow you to help keep them accountable, because that, I think, sometimes is the part that why students rely so much on the private tuition. That's my long-winded answer.
No, fantastic, fantastic. I mean, thank you for such lovely insights and such a beautiful chat that we've just had. And I'm sure all of our listeners would be lucky if they can get a consultation with you. And especially I've been talking to a lot of people, and they're in a lot of confusion and uncertainty. So I'm sure if they reach out to you, they'll have much more clarity on it. And study with Joanne surely will be a big help to them. So thank you, Joanne, for taking out time.
Thank you, Prasenjit. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and all the best to you and your family. Stay safe.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.